All right, let's jump into a deep dive. And this one's a little bit different. We're going to be exploring this really interesting connection between authenticity and, wait for it, orgasm.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
right. I
interesting.
know. So we're going to be looking at some excerpts from this Polish philosophical text.
Okay.
And it really dives into how these moments of, really intense physical experience can actually relate back to living authentically. I mean, we talk about authenticity all the time in terms of like our everyday lives, like are we being true to ourselves in our jobs and our relationships? But this text like takes it to a whole other level, right? Like
Great.
what about those moments of I don't know, intense physical pleasure? How does that fit into the whole picture of authenticity?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think what's so fascinating is that we often think about authenticity, like you said, in our day-to-day choices, Like, am I being authentic to myself in this conversation? Am I ordering what I really want off the menu?
Right.
But this text really pushes us to consider it in like a whole new light, like in this very, I don't know, intimate and maybe even a little bit taboo realm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the text does a really good job of breaking this down into three different perspectives, right? So we've got the biological perspective, we've got the cultural perspective, and then, of course, the philosophical. It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion here.
Yeah, it's like this multifaceted approach to understanding something that, on the surface might seem pretty straightforward.
Right, exactly. So let's start with the biological, like you were talking about. I mean, orgasm is a pretty powerful physical experience.
Yeah.
You've got all those hormones, dopamine, oxytocin. It's like a fireworks display in your brain.
Right, a whole cascade of neurological responses.
So the question becomes, can something that's so deeply rooted in our biology even be considered authentic in a philosophical sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Is it just like this pre-programmed response?
Hmm.
Something that's hardwired into us from an evolutionary standpoint?
Yeah. Exactly. And the text points out that, biologically speaking, these physical responses during orgasm, like the increased breathing, the muscle tension, even the vocalizations, they're pretty universal across cultures.
Right, like there's a common thread running through all of these experiences, regardless of where you're from or how you were raised.
So we're all wired for this, right? Like
Yeah.
it's part of our human nature in a sense. But then, the text goes on to talk about how culture also plays a huge role in shaping how we experience and express orgasm. So it's like, okay, we've got this biological foundation, but then culture comes along and kind of adds its own layer of complexity.
Yeah, it's like this fascinating interplay between nature and nurture, right?
Totally. I
Okay.
mean, think about all the different cultural norms and expectations around sex and sexuality. Things like gender roles, societal taboos, even things like pornography. They all influence how we think about and experience orgasm.
Yeah, and the text even talks about how, like, for example, women are often encouraged to be more vocal during orgasm, while men might be more, subdued because of societal pressures.
Oh, absolutely. Like there's this whole script that we're often given about how we should be experiencing pleasure.
Right. And it makes you wonder, are we really being authentic in those moments, or are we just kind of performing based on these external expectations?
Right, exactly. And that's where things start to get really interesting because now we're talking about this paradox, right? Like
Mm.
we have this primal biological phenomenon that's filtered through this lens of cultural conditioning.
It's like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you've got this powerful instinctive force, but on the other hand, you've got all these societal pressures shaping how that force is expressed.
Yeah, and that really gets to the heart of the question that the text is grappling with. Is a person truly authentic during orgasm? Are we like shedding all pretense and revealing our true selves? Or are we just kind of playing out this culturally programmed script?
I mean, it's a huge question, and it's one that we're going to keep unpacking as we delve deeper into this text. But I think even just posing that question opens up a whole new way of thinking about not just orgasm, but also authenticity in general.
Yeah, I think so too. And it definitely sets the stage for some really fascinating philosophical discussions. Like, how would different philosophical schools of thought approach this question?
Exactly. Like, what would Sartre say? What would Simone de Beauvoir say? What would Foucault say?
Right. They all have such unique perspectives on things like freedom, self-expression, and the power of societal norms.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be super interesting to see how their ideas can help us understand this complex interplay between our biology, our culture, and our own individual experiences of orgasm.
I know. I can't wait to dive in. And I think this is going to be a really thought-provoking conversation for our listeners as well. So if you're ready to explore the philosophical side of things, buckle up because we're about to get deep.
Okay, so we're like right in this gray area
Done.
between instinct and what we've learned.
Yeah.
It's making me wonder if there even is something like a purely natural experience when we talk about,
Yes.
well, orgasm.
Oh, for sure. And that's really where the text goes next, looking at those places where nature and culture are like smashing into each other.
Okay, I'm listening.
So one of the examples is actually sounds, those sounds people make during orgasm.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Think about it. They're probably super primal, right? Maybe even served a real evolutionary purpose way back when.
Interesting.
But now, like, how much is that influenced by, say, movies?
Oh, right. Right.
Or, I don't know, other recordings, or even just what we think our partner wants to hear?
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
Something so, like, basic, maybe even animalistic, could be shaped by all that stuff around us. Exactly. And it gets you thinking, how much of what we assume is natural is actually just, like, absorbed from the world we grow up in?
It's like, whoa, hold on. What's really ME in all of this?
Totally. And that brings us back to those thinkers we mentioned. Kierkegaard, Sartre, that whole existentialist crew.
Yeah, those guys were big on, like, making your own choices, even if everyone else thought you were nuts, right?
Exactly. It was all about breaking free from those expectations, those norms, and really figuring out what you believed in.
So are we saying, like, just chuck all the rules out the window when it comes to this stuff?
Not necessarily. It's more like be aware of those influences,
Yeah.
Then you get to make a real choice about how you deal with them.
So knowledge is power kind of thing.
Yeah, like once you see how culture's shaping things, you can decide, okay, do I buy into this? Do I reject it? What feels right for me?
All right, but how does this translate to, like, actually having a more authentic experience?
Well, the text argues that orgasm, like that specific moment, can be really revealing.
Revealing how?
It's super intense, right? You gotta lose control a little. And that can strip away a lot of pretense.
You're kind of forced to be real.
In a way, yeah. He can bring you face to face with what you actually desire, not just what you think you should desire.
I guess it's kind of scary too, though, right? Being that exposed.
Oh, for sure. Both exciting and scary. Foucault, one of the philosophers we mentioned, thought sexuality was a powerful tool for self-discovery.
Makes sense. Like, the more you know yourself in that way, the more you know yourself, period.
Exactly. And you could argue that orgasm is like the peak of that exploration, you know, the most intense point.
But then that self-discovery, it requires being vulnerable, especially with someone else.
Absolutely. And the text is big on that. Open communication, respect for each other, and consent. Duh. That goes without saying.
It creates the right atmosphere, I guess.
Exactly. That's how both people feel safe enough to really explore what they want, what feels authentic to them,
Makes sense. Like, if you can't even talk about what you like, how are you going to, like, actually experience it?
You nailed it. It's about building that trust so both of you can be honest without worrying about judgment. That's true intimacy.
Okay, but there's this big thing we haven't touched on. Technology.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Dating apps, sex robots, VR porn. Like, is authenticity even possible with all that?
Huge question. And the text does bring it up. It worries about tech making us isolated, messing with real human connection.
Yeah, it's like if you can have an orgasm without even, like, being with another person,
Right.
does that change what it means?
Exactly. Does it cheapen it somehow?
Yeah.
Make it less real?
It's like technology offers the pleasure without all the messy human stuff.
Work, the vulnerability, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then, is it truly fulfilling in the long run?
And this is where my definition of authenticity kind of comes in. Like, yeah, things outside of us influence us, but it's that inner feeling that matters,
I
right?
love that. You're saying it's not just about the actions. It's about how those actions make you feel inside.
Yeah, like, those outside forces, they're always going to be there, culture, tech, whatever. But you can still find what feels true to you within all that.
Yes. And that actually connects so well to the philosophy we talked about earlier. Remember Taylor's idea of culture of authenticity? Like how easily that gets twisted.
Right, right. Or Kierkegaard saying you gotta choose yourself even if society's pushing you in a different direction.
And Sartre's all about taking responsibility, even for your sexual choices, no matter what's going on around you.
So it all boils down to, like, finding what feels genuinely good, What lets you express yourself, even within all those patterns culture throws at you.
You've summarized it perfectly. It's not about reaching some perfect state of pure authenticity untouched by anything.
More like working with the complexity, right?
Exactly. And making conscious choices that fit your values, your desires. That's what this whole deep dive is really about.
So it's not about, like, being this pure, untouched by the world being right. It's more about figuring out how to work with all these forces pushing and pulling on us.
Yes, that's it exactly. Acknowledging those influences, but then saying, okay, but what do I want within all of this?
And that's what makes it authentic ultimately, right?
Exactly. It's about ownership, making choices that feel right for you. And I think this whole deep dive has shown, like, just how complicated that can be.
No kidding. We've been all over the place. Biology, existentialism, culture, even robots, for crying out loud. But it's cool, though, like realizing we actually have a say in all of this.
That's the key, that sense of agency. You're not just along for the ride, you know? You're the one steering.
So how do we actually do that? Like, practically speaking, in a world where everyone's telling you what you should be feeling, especially about pleasure.
$1 million question. There's no easy answer, but honestly, just start by paying attention to your body, your thoughts, your feelings.
Like, get quiet enough to actually hear what's going on inside.
Yep. What feels good to you, not what some magazine or website tells you should feel good.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to, like, question those norms, those expectations that might be holding you back.
Yeah, if something feels off, it's probably off.
Exactly. You get to challenge that. It's your experience, no one else's.
So it's about taking back control, even in something as, I don't know, personal and sometimes scary as sex.
That's it. And that's where that communication with your partner is so important. Creating that safe space where you both can explore without judgment.
Okay, so we've covered a ton. As we wrap up, what's the one thing you hope folks take away from all this?
I want them to feel empowered.
Yeah.
To question, to experiment, to find what feels authentic to them, you know?
Beautifully said. And that's a perfect place to leave it. It's your journey. Own it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, happy diving, everyone.